You've seen those movies where someone gets abducted in broad daylight, endures hours or days of awful torment, but manages to befriend their abductor and ultimately escape from the clutches of violence. Well, those movies and everything behind them is often fictional and planned. But for 14-year-old Abby Hernandez, what happened to her is a tale of survival and incredible resilience. When Abby was kidnapped 3 days before her 15th birthday, the police were on her case from the get-go. But it wasn't until 9 months later when Abby would return home, walking in her front door on her own 2 feet and shocking everyone. The unfortunate kidnapping of Abby Hernandez and how she got away after 9 months of captivity will make you feel like you're watching a horror movie, but this was Abby's real life, or rather her worst nightmare, that changed her life forever. Welcome to True Crime Stories. If you're new here, I'm your host, Ty Knotts, and I post new true crime documentaries every single week. No AI narrations, no fake drama, just true crime. So if you're into that kind of thing, be sure to hit subscribe. It's completely free and it just lets you know when I post new videos. Abigail Hernandez, better known by her nickname as Abby, was born on October 12, 1998, to parents Zinnia and Ruben Hernandez in Manchester, New Hampshire. Abby was defined as a very happy and bright girl, and she was pretty easygoing as well and had tons of friends. Abby defined herself as a tomboy, her words, not mine, and she loved sports, but she also loved listening to classic rock music, and her whole style kind of proved this. Abby also had a boyfriend at the time of the case, named Jimmy Campbell. Jimmy and Abby were head over heels for each other. According to everyone who knew Abby and Jimmy and saw them together, he treated her like a princess. Unfortunately, very early on in Abby's life, though, her parents got divorced and Abby and her sister Sarah were then just raised by Zinnia. They were living happily, and even in this monumental change, it didn't really dim Abby's light or her spirit. She wasn't the type of person to let things that were outside of her control get her down, and she was very level-headed and someone who almost always looked on the bright side. But little did Abby know, her life was about to change drastically when she was simply walking home from school on a seemingly normal autumn day in October of 2013. October 9th of 2013 was a regular school day for Abby. She was just 3 days away from turning 15, which was a huge day for most teenagers. Abby got dressed for school in a gray sweatshirt, black yoga pants, and a pair of black heeled boots. Now, these boots were Abby's favorite because her mom Zinnia had just gotten them for her as an early birthday gift, and this was actually the first time she was wearing them to school. But if you know anything about new shoes, you know that the first couple of days in a new pair of shoes are often a nightmare. You get blisters all over, your feet hurt, and walking in them sounds and feels terrible. Well, Abby was regretting her decision immediately as she made it to school. According to her best friend Miranda, Abby was walking weirdly all day and her feet hurt a lot. Aside from that, Abby's school day went pretty normal. She attended her classes, took pictures with her friends, and just like that, the school day was over. But back at home, Zinnia couldn't welcome her daughter when she came back home after school because Abby didn't make it back. She usually took the bus to and from school, but Zinnia also knew that Abby loved walking back home from school since it's a pretty short walk. So in Zinnia's mind, maybe October 9th was one of those days when Abby decided to walk back home. Though at this point, her mother obviously didn't know about her bad day with her shoes, so that was pretty unfeasible. But soon, afternoon turned into evening, and Abby still hadn't made it home. Zinnia called Abby on her phone, but she wasn't answering, and this was the time when dread took hold of Zinnia and didn't let go. Soon, Zinnia made her way to the school and asked the librarian where Abby was, but the librarian's answer would make Zinnia forget how to breathe. According to the librarian, Abby had left school hours ago on foot. Zinnia immediately went to the investigators and reported 14-year-old Abby Hernandez missing at 7 p.m. that night. The detectives sprung into action immediately, and it didn't take long before word quickly spread around the tiny community of Conway. The investigators got their hands on the school CCTV footage, and they could see Abby leaving the school building and making her way towards her home at about 2:29 p.m. Abby didn't head in any weird or unknown direction. It was just another day like any other. She was wearing all the same clothes that she'd been wearing, and she had her backpack slung over her shoulder. Nothing suggested to the police that she was running away or anything like that. Nothing was missing from Abby's home either, so her disappearance was really weird. The investigators still asked their usual round of questions, and they were mainly concerned with whether Abby was feeling or behaving differently or contemplating running away from something. Everyone who knew Abby said that this was crazy talk. Everyone told the detectives that Abby's 15th birthday was in just days, and she was actively planning it, obsessing over the theme, the menu, and how many friends that she would have to invite. She wouldn't just up and leave everything and everyone behind. All of her friends essentially said the same thing, that this just wasn't what Abby would do. Luckily, the investigators were working at the speed of light, plastering Abby's face everywhere in the media, asking people around town and looking for clues that could lead to Abby. In the meantime, a huge search for Abby was conducted. A lot of volunteers came forward and searched far and wide for her, hoping that they would find her, but sadly they didn't. There were ground and aerial searches, and even the FBI got involved in Abby's case pretty early on. By the time a few short days had passed, hundreds of tips had poured into the police station. The investigators went through each and every one of them, hoping to get some kind of credible information on Abby's case. They also frequently held press conferences to notify the public of any recent developments in the case. But everyone was still on edge, because there was no clue where Abby was. A website called Bring Abby Home was also set up, and it featured numerous photos and videos of Abby. Just 3 days later, it was Abby's 15th birthday. But there was no celebration. Rather, the Hernandez family held a vigil for Abby, and the community gathered and sang happy birthday and prayed that she'd make it back safe. Zinnia was going through a really hard time, but I'm sure this goes without saying. She was trying to stay hopeful for Abby, and she had to be strong for her other daughter, Sarah, but those moments, well, she had times when she felt hopeless and empty. Meanwhile, the detectives were still working their hardest to get this case solved. They checked Abby's cell phone records. The phone was untraceable after Abby went missing, but her last location pinged about a mile away from her home. The investigators also checked text messages, but nothing stood out to them. Abby last texted her boyfriend, Jimmy, who was on his way back home from school as well, though he took the bus. The police did question Jimmy, since he was the last person that Abby spoke to, but they soon realized that Jimmy and Abby's relationship was normal and loving, and there was no way that Jimmy could have been involved in Abby's disappearance. Well, fast forward to November 6th, 2013, almost a month into Abby's disappearance. Zinnia was at home, and she picked up the mail. As she was going through it, her eyes stopped at one of the letters, which was dated October 23rd, marking 2 weeks since Abby's disappearance. Zinnia just had a feeling that this letter was important, and when she ripped it open and read it, well, she then read it again and again, because this letter was from Abby. It was her handwriting, but some of the words were kind of unusual, and Zinnia knew that this wasn't how Abby spoke or wrote, but she knew that it was Abby. The letter detailed how Abby loved her family and that she was safe, but she couldn't tell them where she was. In the letter, Abby confirmed that she had run away and ended it with her telling her mother to keep hoping. Zinnia immediately gave the letter to investigators, and it was a shock to everyone. Had Abby really run away? Why would she do that? And how did none of her friends know about this? But as soon as the detectives saw the letter, they knew that Abby was not a runaway. It all just seemed too perfect, too scripted, and luckily the police didn't drop the investigation. The detectives also tested the letter, and it had Abby's DNA on it, so she was certainly the one who wrote it, but the detectives did not believe that the contents of the letter were constructed by Abby herself. The investigators immediately released this information to the public, hoping for any progress in the investigation. But just like that, 3 more months passed by without hearing anything from Abby or finding her. But let's fast forward to March 17th of 2014, when a woman was driving down a road 30 miles from Conway when she accidentally hit someone else's car. When the driver of the opposing car emerged, he was armed, and he proceeded to strike the woman multiple times with the weapon. It was a horrific attack, and I'm sure the woman was beyond terrified, but right after this, the violent man was obviously arrested. But what does this random attack have to do with Abby's disappearance? Well, the police just couldn't shake the feeling that this attacker could have had something to do with Abby's disappearance. They didn't make their reasoning public knowledge, but for one reason or another, something about this guy just didn't feel right. And it turns out this man was 34-year-old Nate Kibbe. Nate was an avid firearm collector and an overall bizarre guy. Not only was he violent, but he had strong opinions on the Constitution, arms rights, and all the things that go with that. You know the type I'm talking about. This is the kind of guy that believes the F in F-150 stands for freedom. But anyway, after arresting Nate, the investigators wanted to confiscate all of his firearms, dozens of them. And surprisingly, Nate didn't resist. But when the detectives got to Nate's home in a remote area several miles from Conway, they immediately noticed a sizable shipping container tucked away in his backyard. It stuck out like a sore thumb, and they even asked Nate what the deal with this container was. Nate immediately went into defensive mode and told the investigators that they were only there for the firearms and that was all they were going to get. The police did leave the property after this small exchange, but they had a very bad feeling about this shipping container. They kind of poked around at first, but Nate was right. The police were only there for his firearms, so that's all they were legally allowed to look for. So after a few short hours of collecting the evidence they came for, they walked away, never knowing that just beyond that shipping container door was Abigail Hernandez. Nathaniel Kibbe, a very eccentric and strange man, was Abby's abductor. But how did Nate, a stranger to Abby, kidnap her? What did he want from her? And why did he target Abby specifically? Well, for that, we need to go all the way back to the fateful day when Abby originally went missing. As Abby was walking out of the school that day, she'd actually missed the bus by just a few seconds. Her feet hurt a lot because of her new boots, but she really had no choice but to make the small walk to her home. As she was texting her boyfriend Jimmy, she saw a car pull up from the corner of her eye. It was a 30-something-year-old man driving, and he noticed Abby's limp and offered her a lift. Abby, grateful for the man's seemingly kind gesture, agreed and got into the stranger's car, and this was a big mistake. But Abby had no idea. After all, Conway's a relatively quiet and safe area, at least as far as Abby knew. But rather than take her home, this man drove to an isolated parking lot, and that's when Abby knew that something was very wrong. She tried to let the driver drop her off right there, but that was when he armed himself and completely subdued Abby. This man, if you haven't put two and two together already, was Nate Kibbe, and he was out looking for someone, anyone that he could terrorize. Nate proceeded to tie Abby's hands and blindfolded her, and even made her crouch down in the leg space of the passenger seat so that no one could see her. After what felt like forever, the car stopped and Abby was pulled out of the car and pushed onto something soft. Turns out it was a dirty mattress, and as soon as Abby's blindfold was removed, she took in her surroundings. The floors were metal, the room was small, and there were latches on the door. The walls of the small room were padded to make it soundproof, and this time Abby saw her abductor wearing a mask that was a golden Halloween mask. Nate threatened Abby that if she ever tried to leave or make a noise, then there would be consequences. I can't even imagine what Abby must have been feeling. The words scared and terrified don't even shine a candle on what Abby was experiencing. Sadly, almost immediately, the cycle of torture and abuse began for Abby. Nate was a disgusting and sadistic piece of work. Even though she was already locked up inside this giant storage container, Nate continued to keep her bound for days on end. Worst of all, he would attack her with anything from a stun gun to a shock collar, just for fun. Needless to say, on top of this, she was also repeatedly taken advantage of. Initially, all Abby could do was endure the abuse and pray that she made it out alive. Even though she was subjected to the worst possible situation, she knew one thing. She wanted to live, and she wanted to make it back home. During her first few weeks of captivity, while the detectives and Abby's family were doing press conferences, Nate would terrorize Abby by telling her that everyone was looking for her. This was such a sick and twisted way of making Abby feel miserable and emotionally and mentally helpless. She knew everyone she loved was out there just a few short miles away, desperately looking for her. But she also knew, chances were, they weren't going to make it in time. Abby watched her mom tearing up in front of the cameras. But as much as Nate's form of terrorizing was hurtful for Abby, it also gave her purpose. Purpose to live, purpose to hang in there, and purpose to quite possibly escape. 2 weeks into captivity, Nate ordered Abby to write that letter to her mother, and that was the same letter that she would receive on November 6th. In Nate's head, this was a way of misleading the police from the investigation. So we have confirmation that Abby indeed wrote the letter, and she even etched the words help and kidnap with her nails while she was writing it. But unfortunately, Nate was smarter than that and he found out about it. Abby was terrified about what he would do to her, but he just made her write another letter, and after inspecting that one, he mailed it out. But the abuse didn't stop. 6 months into captivity, Abby realized something. She had power over Nate. She could easily manipulate him. It was a revelation of sorts, and she had to give it a try. Abby talked to Nate about normal things like two friends would, and just as Abby suspected, Nate was quick to form a weird bond of sorts with her. Nate would call Abby the closest thing he had to a daughter, which is a whole new level of what the heck. Nate would also sit with Abby and talk to her about his life and his views on the Constitution. He'd give Abby books to read, and also removed her blindfold so that Abby now knew for sure what Nate looked like. Speaking of books, Nate gave Abby a cookbook, and it had the name Nate Kibbe written on it. So this was the first time in 6 months of captivity that Abby knew Nate's name. Abby found out that Nate was a huge fan of Ayn Rand, a Russian-born American author who was known for developing a philosophical system called objectivism. Nate was also fond of the Gadsden flag and libertarianism, and he would talk to Abby about these things for hours as if he was teaching a student. Nate also made counterfeit money, and this was his way of getting back at the government that he hated so passionately. At one point, Abby even helped him out, all to gain his trust and make herself look as non-threatening as possible. Finally, the abuse Abby endured lessened, but it didn't stop completely. He began to see street workers, and get this, he paid them in counterfeit money. So not only was Nate using the services of adult workers, but he also scammed them, which is once again just unbelievable. Well, this would come back to bite him, and this would ultimately be Abby's ticket to freedom. Nate made Abby write one more letter before his interaction with the investigators about the firearms and the questions about the shipping container. The detectives didn't know it then, but they were so close to Abby, but they couldn't do anything. This interaction made Nate even more scared, and he confronted Abby and told her, quote, she knew too much. He also tried to relocate Abby, but because Abby was blindfolded, she didn't know where she was being taken. In reality, though, Nate was only messing with her, and he took her into his car, drove in circles, and then brought her back to the same shipping container. But remember how Nate was seeing adult workers at the time? Well, one of them was a 27-year-old woman named Lauren Monday, and Nate had obviously scammed her by giving her fake money. When Lauren went to the store to buy something the next day, that was when she realized that the money was fake. Furious, Lauren called Nate and went off on him, even threatening to go to the police. Well, even though Nate was smart and he didn't give Lauren his real name, well, he wasn't the brightest, because the email that he'd given to Lauren had his full name on it, and Lauren was able to describe Nate's car to the detectives too. So after the call with Lauren, Nate barged into the bunker and container where Abby was, and he was angry, but also nervous. But Abby knew better than anyone not to poke the bear, so she remained calm and asked him what was wrong. That was when Nate went on a rant, and Abby listened to everything. She was used to it by now, and she didn't want to be on the receiving end of Nate's abuse, so even though she didn't want to, she listened to Nate rant, which was a good thing, because what happened next was something that even Abby didn't expect. Nate approached Abby, handed her a plastic bag with her clothes in it, and said, "I need to get you out of here." Abby thought that Nate was going to take her somewhere else again, but Nate had different plans. He drove, and Abby was on pins and needles the whole time. Sure, Abby had gotten comfortable with Nate, and she could guess what he would do most of the time, but this was different. When Abby looked out of the window, familiarity and realization hit her like a freight train. Nate was taking Abby back to the same place from where he kidnapped her. He stopped the car, told Abby to get out, and without wasting any time or asking any questions, Abby got out. She slammed the door shut and saw Nate drive away. Abby was in a complete state of disbelief. The feeling of excitement of being free was bubbling inside of her, but she was also scared that Nate would come back any minute and take her back to that disgusting bunker. Still in denial, Abby made the short walk back to her home wearing the same clothes that she had on 9 months ago, and she opened the door and called out for her mom. Zinnia was in the living room, drowning in grief, when she heard Abby's voice. Zinnia truly thought that she was hallucinating. When she saw Abby with her own 2 eyes, Zinnia was thrust all the way back to that night in October, when all she wanted was for Abby to walk through that front door. The level of emotion that was running through these two is unlike anything you could imagine. All Xenia ever wanted, literally the only thing she thought about, was getting her daughter back home. Now, without any warning or buildup whatsoever, her daughter just walked back into her life safe and sound. Abby was now home, but Nate was still out there, and it wasn't easy for Abby to open up, and understandably so. Nate, before letting Abby go, threatened her that if she ever went to the police, then he would come after her and her family, and she wouldn't like the consequences. This truly scared Abby, and she would do anything to keep her family out of danger, even keep quiet about her abductor. Because of this, the public had very mixed feelings about Abby and her disappearance. A lot of people accused Abby of lying and said that she merely ran away and that the whole kidnapping story was a ruse to hide something else. Everyone questioned whether Abby's disappearance was even real or not. It was such a traumatizing moment for Abby and her family. That same community who was there for Xenia throughout the entire ordeal was now turning against her and her daughter. Luckily, with the police's help, Abby finally gained enough courage to reveal who her abductor was, and in 2014, Nathaniel Kibbe was arrested. It took almost 3 years for the state to build a case against Nate, and he was facing almost 205 separate charges involving making counterfeit money, sexual assault, and kidnapping of Abby Hernandez. Nate was eventually found guilty, obviously, and sentenced to 45 to 90 years in prison, and at his sentencing, a very familiar person made her appearance: Abby Hernandez. Her statement on May 16th of 2016 was so moving and powerful, and her bravery is something we could all learn from. Abby walked into the courtroom that day, looked Nate in the eyes, and told him she forgave him for everything he had done to her. Because of Nate, Abby didn't take any moment in her life for granted anymore. Her abduction, as traumatic and horrific as it was, changed her perspective on life, and she now vowed to never take another sunset, another second, another happy moment in her life for granted. And she explained that she appreciates her freedom all the more after her abduction. As of now, Abby is a hairdresser and a proud mother of a child that she loves to death. She's living her life peacefully and privately, and we can only hope that she's moving on and healing from this horrible and life-altering trauma. Abby was and is a fighter. Even when she was faced with the worst possible situation and outcome, she continued to press on, not only for herself, but for her family. What Abigail went through was truly unimaginable. You cannot make this stuff up. But her perseverance, her bravery, even when staring right into the face of evil, well, it leaves a lesson for us all to learn. To never give up, even when the odds are completely stacked against us. Thank you guys for tuning in to another episode of True Crime Stories. I wanted to give a special thank you to a couple channel members, including Troy Graham and Mel Turner. If you also want to become a member of the channel, you'll gain access to new videos sometimes days or weeks before they're uploaded to the public, and it is a great way to support the channel and help out. And I really appreciate all of you that have decided to do that. So if you want to join, you can click that big join button below the video, or find the link down in the description. And don't forget, True Crime Stories t-shirts are also now available, and you can grab one of those from the link down in the description as well. But as always, if you enjoyed this video, check out this other interesting case I covered, and don't forget to subscribe. It's totally free and just keeps you up to date with all my future videos. But my name is Ty Knotts, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.